At this time, would like to introduce the CEO and founder of Bitnetix and SmartVox, Loyd.
Thank you. So I did this talk last year, or at least a part of this talk was done last year as well. The first half of what I'm going to be doing now will be a very fast recap of that. And then the last half, we're going to delve into some some advanced event handler technology and Amazon EC2 instance creation. So the presentation itself is going to be pretty bland. I'm going to go through 2 slides here, and then we'll get right into doing some typing. There will be a copy of all of the commands that I'm doing will be available as part of the distribution for the presentations later. So you don't have to worry about making notes or taking pictures of screens or anything like that unless you want to. But I will be copying and pasting from a spreadsheet that has all the commands into an actual shell in real time. And that brings me to the very first thing, which is not up here, and that is if my network isn't working, this will be a short presentation because this is a live demo. And if that is the case, we'll just fill the time doing shadow puppets. And I'm not really good at shadow puppets, so I'll be looking for you guys to help out in that case. There will be a brief little test to demonstrate that things are actually working. It will be using Twitter. And the test will go out through my company's Twitter handle, Bitnetix. So if you want to participate and get the tweet, you're welcome to follow Bitnetix on Twitter, even if you unfollow at the end of the talk. So we're going to start by logging into Amazon Web Services and creating a new EC2 server instance. Before I go too far, does anybody have experience with EC2 on Amazon Web Services? Just quick show of hands. So a handful of people, great. So you know what I'm talking about. For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about or don't have experience with it, Amazon released back in, well, it was on the keynote slide, right? 2006. Amazon released their cloud services platform. And that's Amazon Web Services, or AWS. And part of that is they offer a number of components that you can use to sort of build your cloud-based application. Everything from SQL servers to database, or to data storage, to logging and DNS management, including processors. So if you need to run code, you can use their EC2, which I never remember what it stands for, but something like, if anybody knows it, feel free to Google it. But basically, if you start up an EC2 instance, you're running a virtual server on AWS's, or Amazon's AWS platform. So we're going to create a new EC2 server. It only takes a few minutes. We will install Nagios Core. We will install a piece of software that I don't know how to pronounce, but I pronounce it as TTYter, which is a command line Twitter client for Unix operating systems. We'll do some basic monitoring, and then we're going to break stuff and see what happens. Part of the breaking stuff is we're going to add some more EC2 instances and see what happens now that we have Amazon Web Services connected to our Nagios server. So a typical application for this, I don't have this actual slide, but a typical application for this would be if you have a web server that you are, or a web application that you're running off of AWS, you may have multiple web servers, you may have multiple database backend servers, you may have application servers that sit in the middle. If your web servers are getting too overused, you may want to add another web server to handle that additional load. So rather than figuring that out by hand and going into AWS and creating a new server and installing software, Nagios can actually do all that work for you. And that's what we'll briefly show you that. This isn't really a how-to, it's really more of a gee whiz. So there are some resources here. Again, I'll leave these up throughout the presentation, but I will be switching back and forth to a number of different things. So that's it, boom, there's the end of my presentation. We'll come back. So now we're going to go take a look at what we're actually installing. So there is a spreadsheet, if I go find it. Let me get rid of some extra junk here real quick. That can go away. Oh, that's right, that went back to small. Sorry, we had a little technical issue earlier. So we're going to make this big so you can all see it. All right, can everybody read that okay? Or can anybody, is there anybody that can't read that? or at least well enough. So this is basically a list of commands that I'm going to type very quickly by copying and pasting once we create the EC2 instance. So I'm going to flip back and forth between that primarily and, whoop, not my desktop. By the way, that's a picture of a Comet 67P, that's about 10 miles away from the spacecraft that took the picture, which I think is pretty fantastic. It's amazing what technology can do. So here is my screen. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is make sure that you can all read my text here. Is that big enough for everybody to see? Excellent. All right, don't read it, it's private. Let's go over to Amazon, and we're going to log into Amazon Web Services, aws.amazon.com. We're going to go log into our account, which I'm thinking I might not use this mouse. It's kind of upsetting me. So I apologize. You all get to watch me type for a while here. I can't type my own email address. So again, AWS is a collection of services. And if you look at this list of services, these are all the things that you can use to create your own very personalized web-based application or cloud-based application in Amazon. We're going to use EC2, which consists essentially of virtual server instances that provide some disk and processor and memory, and you can install whatever you want on them. So you'll see there is one here, this Nagios instance, which is in a stopped state. This is my backup in case everything fails. I've got one already built, but we're not going to use that right now. So we're going to create a new instance by launching an instance. We're going to answer these questions mostly by default. We're going to use the bare bones AWS instance. We're going to leave everything the way it is, and I promise you, if you actually do this, you can answer these questions yourself a little bit differently. We're going to name this box NW2114. We're going to give it a security group that is pre-configured to be a web-based security group. One of the things that Amazon provides is lots of security, and we want to make sure that we can connect to this instance using a web browser and an SSH key that we already have. So we are going to make sure that that security group allows that access. This key is a key that you only get to download once, so make sure you save it, or else you will have to go recreate your key, and you cannot get to your old instances if you do not have the proper key. So this was launch of a new instance. Now we have a second instance with a little spinning icon and in a pending state. This takes maybe a minute, minute and a half before this is fully spun up, but in the meantime, I'm going to hit refresh a couple times because I'm looking down here on the bottom where it says public DNS, because as soon as we get a DNS IP address, we can start getting onto the box and doing some other things. I promise. Any second now. Yeah. Oh, yeah, hey, thank you for that. There we go. It would have been a long demo, right? Please hold your questions till the end, but if I do something stupid, by all means, let me know. Thank you. So we're going to log in as EC2 user, if I can spell it right. We're not in Europe. So there we go. We're on a running box. Took all of a minute and 10 seconds because I had it on the wrong instance to get the IP address. But EC2 basic instance has a EC2 user, which you have to log in as in sudo to root. So I'm going to switch back real quick to my spreadsheet. So we have logged in. We have clicked on EC2. We have created an instance. We got our public IP. Our firewall was pre-configured. We've logged into our service, and now we're going to update. So I'm just literally going to copy and paste these commands. So the first thing we want to do is, remember, the end result of this is that we want to have a running Nagios Core server. So these are installing the prerequisites for Nagios Core. And because Amazon maintains their own repositories, this is a CentOS-based system, but they maintain their own repositories, and you're on their own, I don't know, trillion-bit Ethernet connection, or whatever they have internally. This is incredibly fast. And this whole process from start to finish, except for the reboot, could probably be done in about 4 minutes including the installation of Nagios itself. So this server, while we're watching this server is considered one of their micro servers. This is the smallest little slice of processing you can get from Amazon. You may need a bigger box. I'm not here to try to help you source your resources from within Amazon, but this is also available for free. If you're not an AWS user, you can use these micro instances for free for a year. So it's a great way to get started with playing with Amazon Web Services. So we've installed some software. We're going to go make sure the software that's out there is updated. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to reboot our box. So I'm going to copy that and get ready to type that in. The nice thing about Amazon, well, there's a number of nice things. The nice thing about Amazon in the context I'm about to speak is we didn't go over this because I'm not really trying to teach you how to use Amazon Web Services. But while we're waiting, up here in the top, I'm not going to use my laser pointer. If you can see my mouse, top right corner, we're actually in what you and I would call a data center, but what Amazon calls an availability zone. And this is the geographical locations where they have data centers, essentially. So you can have an East Coast and a West Coast if you're in the United States. You can have something in Ireland, Singapore, Tokyo, Sydney, and Sao Paulo. And for all of you Portuguese speakers, I hope I pronounced Sao correctly. So this isn't just a US-based service. You can distribute your servers literally around the planet and put them in whatever the appropriate data center is to run your application. So if we flip back here and just go right back into our box, it's up and running again after its reboot, which makes things really nice. So again, we're going to become root. We're going to go I'm going to just do it this way real quick. So a lot of these commands that I'm going to do are separated by semicolons just so I don't have to type literally 100 commands to do this. But this is basically CDing to user local source and grabbing what I hope is the latest Nagios release. At least it was when I wrote this documentation. We're going to grab the plugins as well, and then we're going to go uncompress Nagios. We're going to go CD to the Nagios directory. I'm going to scroll down so you guys can see this a little more. I'm going to just grab these things as a list where we go make our Nagios users. We're going to lock the password for Nagios so there's no password associated with it. We're going to run our configure and let Nagios go build itself. Configure ran. We're going to go do our make. And I probably should have put a clock on this, but this clock up here says it's 10:43, and we'll see how long that takes to actually complete. Again, the goal here is to get Nagios Core up and running sort of as quickly as possible. So a lot of these commands, you might want to do something different if you're actually building Nagios for your specific monitoring needs. But the idea is we're going to get Nagios up and running here in about 15 minutes, including me talking, so that we can move on to the next phase of okay, so that was a minute. The next phase of actually using it. So here's the install. That's done. If we wanted to use the classic UI, we could do that command as well. We're not going to. So now we're going to go do the plugins, same basic task. We're going to go be where the plugins are. We're going to uncompress them. We're going to CD the plugins directory. And we're going to do a configure and run the make. And that is actually followed by the make install. So I have great confidence that that will work. So we're going to move down a little bit farther. So we need to have a HT password file and username for Nagios UI. If I go back here, we're just going to create essentially a blank, we're going to create a blank password file, and then we're going to add a password. As it says in the next cell, you can use any password you want for your Nagios admin user, but for the purposes of this demo, we're going to use the password welcome. So any of you that want to follow along at home, even though I'm going quickly, and look at the IP address that we get, you can log in with welcome. So here it is, welcome, welcome. Now, this is a little bit of magic. I'll show you what the command is specifically. We're going to go and we're going to remove something in the Nagios config directory called demo.cfg, if it exists, and then we're going to go get through wget. We're going to go get demo.cfg off of our corporate web servers. This is just a single configuration file that we're going to run. Oops, that's the wrong command because I copied and pasted the wrong thing. So if we go look at this real quick, this is just a standard Nagios config file, but it's going to contain the host and host groups that we're looking at, a couple of command definitions, and some quick little contact information, which has been sort of pre-designed to work with this demo. So I'm not really going to go over what's in that file. I'm not going to go through what the structure is, because I'm really not here to show you that. We're really trying to get to the second half. So we just used a sed command to go add that demo.cfg file to the Nagios config file, so it's actually reading it. And then we're going to go do a couple of these things real quick. So this last command that I typed, this cnag alias, this is something that I've just used over the years that does the verification check running against the Nagios config file, so that I can see really quickly whether we have warnings or errors. This is basically the same thing that a config test does through service. So check config says we're running okay, or it's okay. We are going to go do a couple of commands at once. So we're going to set some ownership, make sure that Nagios directory was owned by Nagios and not by root. We're going to turn on our HTTP service and start it. For those of you that aren't sysadmin type people, if you issue an HTTP restart command using the service command, the first thing it does is try to stop it, and then it tries to start it. So this failed is expected, because it's actually telling you it failed to stop it because it wasn't running. So even though it's a big red failed message, it's actually what we're looking for, because the HTTP service was not running. We don't have a really well-designed machine right now. There's no fully qualified domain name. There's no reverse DNS or anything like that. So we're going to get a couple errors like this. But fundamentally, we were looking for, did we start the web server? Yes, we did. And did we start the Nagios server? And yes, we did. So we go back and we look here, and it says, check it out. We can go run whatever this is, which I got to go get this IP address again. And we can go look at our new Nagios server. I'm having a real hard time typing this morning. That's promising, right? No caps. You can use that welcome password that we just put in, and we're going to make this bigger so you can all see it. Looks like Nagios Core version 4.0.8. So that took us, it was a little longer than I hoped. That was 18 minutes. But I'll chalk up 3 minutes of that to me going over my slides. So 15 minutes, we went from nothing to Nagios Core installed on an AWS instance. So this is just the basic, the localhost definition. Make this a little bit smaller so it fits better. The localhost definition that comes with the Nagios configuration that we installed through the sample files. But then we also have this NW24 demo machine up here, which, I'll be honest, is just an alias for localhost, but at least lets us have something that we can play with and pretend that it's a real server that we want to monitor. So there's only one service defined on this host, and that is the root partition, which is checking for free disk space. So if we go back to the presentation real quick and go back to see what we're going to do. So we've created our EC2 server. We have installed Nagios Core. We're going to go do some other stuff before we break things. And that other stuff is something that we use within our own company for our notifications, and that is TTY-tur. So TTY-tur, which I consider to be the best CLI Twitter client ever. Rather than dealing with email notifications or having an SMS dedicated gateway box, we actually rely on Twitter for the vast majority of our notifications. And what that means is we can have multiple private Twitter accounts that we allow our people to subscribe to, or follow, I guess is the right terminology. And we can direct the appropriate alert to the appropriate Twitter account, and the people that need to see that, and the people that want to see it could see it. But if you are a systems admin and you don't care about network, then you don't have to subscribe to the network Twitter account that we use for notifications. Twitter is fairly robust, it's fairly instant, it's on every device. There's nothing special that you need to make it work. There's no additional hardware, there's no additional expense. Of course, Twitter doesn't always work, So we have backups, which is basically to use email if we don't get those notifications acknowledged. But fundamentally, we send everything out through Twitter. So there is a command line client that I ran across about 2 years ago called TTYter, which is really fantastic. And for those of you who are actually following the Bitnetix Twitter account right now, every Nagios, Nagios Con 14 hashtag that goes out on Twitter is being retweeted? I just made that word up. Retweeted by the Bitnetix account using TTYter. So all those hashtags are being retweeted by the Bitnetix account using this command line client. So we're going to go get it, which, what did I do wrong? I didn't actually copy it. It's basically a giant Perl script. So rather than have it be called 2.1.00.text, we're going to go move it when it finally downloads. Oh, this is fun. I must have actually done this 3 times now. Good enough. We can make sure we can execute it. We're going to make sure that it's in our own path. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit. In this case, in order for TTYter to actually work, you need to run it for the first time, which it will run you through the steps that you need to authenticate with Twitter's OAuth to get your Twitter account connected to your Nagios credentials, basically. And you have to log in with a browser to Twitter. You have to go back over here. You have to do what it says. You have to hit enter. It's going to give you a URL. You type the URL in. It is going to authenticate within Twitter. Twitter's going to give you a security code, which you then come back here and type. That will then generate a key file, which you can use to authenticate yourself with TTYter so you can tweet. But I don't want to do that because I already have that. Oh, thank you, Microsoft. So this is actually the directions. If you were going to do that, you would sign into your Twitter account. You'd press enter once on TTYter. You go to the URL. You click authorize app. You punch the numbers back in, and then you've got your key. I already have a key, so I'm going to use it. Now, for those of you who are following along at home, I don't have beeps enabled. Let me get beeps on here real quick, because this is the best part. Well, we'll skip that. This is going to be me sending a tweet. And you can't see it, but at the top of my screen is the Twitter tweet, whatever the word is, that just came in that says, Eric Loyd just made TTYter live for Nagios Inc., Bitnetix and SmartVox at Nagios Con 14. And now the Bitnetix account's going to retweet that, I think. So it kind of becomes a big mess. But so again, about a minute worth of installing code, and now we can tweet from a command line, which means we can tweet from within Nagios. So let's go make sure we can tweet from within Nagios. Oops, actually, that probably should have been in the wrong order. To make sure the key is in the right place, we have to copy the key so that Nagios can use the key that we theoretically just generated, even though it was the key that I already had. So this is just going to be a couple of housekeeping things to make sure that we've got some commands that we need to have in libexec so that we can actually use that TTYter. Again, this is all in this resources slide. So we're actually, at this point, we're looking at the send Twitter, what's the word I'm looking for? Whatever, the command file that actually is the wrapper for using TTYter within Nagios. So now we've restarted Nagios because we've added some stuff to its configuration. We're going to go back over here, and oh look, we're ready to go break something. So let's go get Nagios up and running here. And I will make that a little bit bigger because I can barely read it, and I'm standing in front of it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use fallocate to actually go create a file that's not quite as big as how much space we have left on our root file system. So fallocate, and the size is going to be that with a couple of zeros added at the end, except that needs to be an L, not an I. Thanks. So now, you know, I should probably actually follow my own directions. Because I have this written down. Here we go. So now we're at 97% used. So if we go over to our Nagios, and we actually go execute a service check now, rather than waiting for it, and come back, we will see very quickly that Nagios says, hey, something is wrong with this. There we go. So I don't know if this is actually hooked up to Twitter, to be honest, but if it were, I just got a tweet. But we now have a critical, and as you can see, we're in a hard state. Again, this is because this is for the demo. I don't want to sit around and wait for Nagios to retry and retry and retry. So we're in a hard critical state. And one of the things that we did when we downloaded some of those files in that massive spreadsheet of commands is one of those things that we downloaded was an AWS CLI script and a key file that allows Nagios to actually execute commands in the Amazon Web Services environment. So now when we go back and look at our hosts, actually let's look at the hosts within Nagios, we have this brand new host with an IP address of 173.30.0.249, which wasn't there before. And if we go refresh our EC2 instance list, you'll see that there is this third host out there running now. It doesn't have a name. It does have a public IP, but for the purposes of what we're doing here, we're treating this all using Amazon's internal IP address space. But what I've done is this, where is it? This down here. I've lost it. Well, anyway, there is what Amazon calls an AMI. Here we go, right over here, AMI ID. This is what you can think of as the snapshot of a previous instance that I generated specifically for this test. And what that instance was nothing more than a server that comes up and has a HTTP server running on it, which it should be up at this point. Yay, there's a web server running on it. Big deal. But we're pretending that that web server is part of our big web application that we've deployed using Amazon Web Services. So as a result, Nagios said, hey, the test that we were using, which is actually the wrong test, it's having a file system that's full, but we're going to pretend that that was a test to check for perhaps load on our web servers. The test that we used, that the file system is full, said, hey, we've got a problem, let's go fire off an event handler. The event handler then created a new instance in EC2 that was based on the web server instance that I've created before. So again, we're kind of cheating a little bit using service checks which really don't apply, but you get the idea. If we really had a big web application, then we would be checking web servers, we'd be checking CPU load on those servers, we'd be checking the back-end database servers and application servers, and if it looks like our load is starting to creep up, or maybe our hit rates are starting to creep up, we can spread that load out by adding another server. So now we have a list of servers, excuse me. So now we have a list of servers that is going to continue to grow because we haven't cleared that error. So every time Nagios comes back and checks to make sure that error is still there, the event handler is going to fire. And as long as we're in that critical state, Nagios is going to say, we need more resources. We need more resources. We need more resources. So on those machines, all we're doing is we're checking for whether the HTTP service is running and whether or not well, there's a root partition check, but it's actually fake, so ignore it because it's checking localhost. But the HTTP service on that first instance that got turned up automatically, that's running. Great. That wasn't enough to clear our error. Well, now we have a second instance that hasn't been checked by Nagios yet, but we have a second instance out there that's running a web server. Maybe that was enough to actually clear our load condition problem. And so just to make sure that this shows up, we're back down to normal load, which in our fake test is not full file system. And now we can watch as Nagios stops making new hosts, hopefully, And the whole way that it does it is simply to execute what is essentially CLI commands that go and utilize Amazon's EC2 instance creation from command line. So I'm just going to go let Nagios and Amazon fight it out and figure out whether or not they're going to stabilize or if Nagios is going to keep going, because I'll be honest, this may not be the perfect demo. It may actually continue creating new instances. But let's go back to our spreadsheet here real quick, which that's not the spreadsheet, that's the spreadsheet. So if you created an instance within AWS exactly the same way that I just did, you've created what's called an on-demand instance, which means I need that instance now, and I need it for as long as I need it, and when I don't need it, I'm going to release it back into the wild. It's an on-demand instance. They're charged more per running hour than some of the other instance types. Both the Nagios server itself and then all the dynamic servers that just got created are these on-demand instances. Amazon also provides a couple other ways to get instances. If you know you're going to need a pool of resources and you know you're going to have it turned on a certain period of time, you can get a reserved instance, which means this instance is always ready for you. And then there's a heavy, medium, and light utilization. And those differences are based on how long do you think that instance is going to be up, actually literally turned on any given time frame. And they talk in terms of hours. So it's usually based on, is it going to be up for 1,000 hours a month, or for 2,000 hours, or for 7,500 hours a month, which is about a month's worth of hours. So if you said you needed a reserved, heavy usage instance, you're going to get the cheapest possible rate. And then if you say, I need it for 3 years, and commit to that 3-year term, you're going to get it even cheaper. So if you look at how much it costs to run this instance, if you just grab the on-demand instance like what we've done, it's going to run you about $9 per month. And that's between the instance charges, a wee bit of bandwidth, and a wee bit of disk space. If you got a 3-year heavy usage instance, it's going to run a little bit less than half of that, which is about 15 cents a day. It's about 14.8 cents or something like that per day to run your Nagios instance. So I'm not trying to be an advertisement for AWS because I'm not, but if you're running a whole bunch of Nagios servers and you don't want to cool your data center, this might be a way to save on some HVAC as well as the cost of actually having hardware. 15 cents a day is, well, you know, the joke is you can't even buy a cup of coffee for 15 cents, right? So if we go back now and take a look at what's going on over here in Nagios and EC2 land, it looks like Nagios has calmed down. It has stopped creating new instances. Our root partitions are starting to come out correctly. Let's make this a little bit smaller so we can see everything. There is no data being returned by the web server on localhost, which is why that one is a warning. We don't have a swap file, which is why that one's in critical. I'm not actually sure why this one says it's critical still, so let's go take a look at that one. Oh, it's actually cleared itself now. So our platform has returned to what we consider normal at this point. So with the exception of those two, or the warning and the critical, which they're not well configured for this demo, so we'll just kind of ignore them right now. Everything's okay. So Nagios is no longer firing off those event handlers, and new instances are not being created. So before I stop, I want to actually take a look at what that looks like, the script that goes and creates this. And I can't type and talk at the same time. So what we did was we created an aws.sh script here. And it's pretty simple for the purposes of this demo. We actually run a part of our platform on AWS, and it dynamically scales based on usage. It's a little more complex than what this event handler is, but at its core, this is the same technology that we use in that event handler. And basically, we only want to run if we're in a critical state and if we're in a hard state. Excuse me. We're going to make use of a temp file because we need to go get some data back from Amazon when we fire off this instance, and it's a lot easier to just copy the copy the output than it is to go query Amazon further to get information. So this is the magic right here, which says in English, basically, I want to go create a new instance within EC2, within Amazon Web Services, that is based on an image called AMI 48 Echo 74 Fox 20. which is that snapshot of that HTTP server that I created a while ago. I want to use an SSH security key of BTC EC2, which is Bitnetix Technology Consulting EC2. I'm going to use a security group called whatever that is, and that security group is Amazon's firewall, basically. So that security group is what I had pre-configured to allow web traffic and SSH traffic. We're going to create an instance type called t2.micro, which again is that smallest possible slice of EC2 that you can get. We're going to put it into a subnet that is, again, this is a predefined thing. You get all this information out of your overview screen from within Amazon Web Services, but this is the subnet within my cloud at Amazon that I want to deploy this machine into. So this is just kind of a generic subnet in my case. It's not specific to, say, web server zone or perhaps database server zone, but you can split things up that way if you want to. And then we want to go make one box. If we knew we were going to make 4 boxes, we could change that count to 4, and we'd spin up 4 boxes instead of just 1. We grab that output, save it to a temp file. We wait 5 seconds just to make sure that things kind of calm down, and then we go do some really weird awking and grepping to go get the IP address internal to Amazon. They always have a private IP, and sometimes they have a public IP. But we grab that private IP address, and then we go create what looks exactly like a host definition within Nagios using that new IP address. And we assign it to a host group called NW2014-EC2, which is defined in that demo CFG file that we looked at briefly earlier. And all that does is create the HTTP service and root service, or root partition service checks. So there's nothing that we have to actually do from a service standpoint because we know this is a web server box. And Nagios has already been pre-configured with service checks that will run on web server boxes using host groups. So we just create the host group within Nagios. We create the host dynamically here, pipe it to the, or attach it to the end of our demo.cfg file, and then we go do what all of you should learn how to do if you don't already know how to do it, which is to use the Nagios API, Nagios Core API, to go issue a program restart, which in this case, it's a very small instance. We are only monitoring literally 4 boxes, one of which is localhost with very few services. This might not be something that you can afford to do every time your event handler fires and creates a new instance. But if you're monitoring a few hundred boxes with a few tens of thousands of services, a Nagios restart might not be what you want to do. On the other hand, if you're doing this and you're doing this in an AWS environment, it's a lot easier to create multiple Nagios boxes than are monitoring smaller collections of servers and services, so you still can. So all this does is just takes the current date and pipes out the correctly formatted date and restart program into the Nagios command pipe, which is how you communicate with Nagios. A quick shout out, Janice Singh from NASA is going to be giving a talk tomorrow. I don't know what time, on using the Nagios API. I strongly suggest that if you're interested in doing that sort of thing, that you go see what she is going to talk about. I don't know, other than it's just the Nagios API. But this is the way that we get Nagios to go get those new hosts once we've added it to the demo.cfg file. Okay, all that being said, that's kind of where this ends. Because it's easy to put a host into Nagios. All you got to do is append something to your host config file, basically, and restart Nagios. It's a lot harder to take it back out, because now you need to take a stanza of that config file and delete it and restart Nagios. And I really didn't want to do that. So that's as far as we went. You can see it doesn't take a lot to get Nagios Core installed on, let me get the slide back up. It doesn't take a lot to get Nagios Core installed on an AWS EC2 instance. It probably could have been done in 10 minutes if I'd have just typed it instead of talking about it. And we were up and running and monitoring stuff within 15 minutes. The rest of this is really just kind of showing you, given a virtualized platform, and you can do similar things with VMware, you could do similar things with Xen and other virtualization platforms. AWS is, some people love it, some people hate it. I'm not trying to sell you on it, but it's the platform we use for some of our infrastructure. And because of its tools that it gives you the ability to do these command line things, you can connect it very easily into Nagios, and not only have Nagios dynamically adjust what your platform looks like, but it can do it in almost real time. So if you're paying 15 cents a day for your server, but you've got 20,000 servers that you're running in a cloud, that could add up to a lot of money. So if you're only running the ones you absolutely positively need, and then when you need more, you bring them on, and when you don't need them again, you turn them off, your demand curve for your services will match the cost of goods curve that you are being charged to provide those services. So Nagios can really help actually control your costs by controlling your usage of these cloud resources. This presentation, which basically is this resources slide, and the spreadsheet will be available. You can see the spreadsheet there. You can grab that whenever you want to. This will be part of the documents that they submit as the, release as part of the papers from the conference. So if you want to take a picture or whatever, feel free. I'll leave that up there. I'm now gonna, you're the guy with the microphone, I guess, so if there's any questions or comments, or if you think I did something that I should have done differently, please grab a mic and let me know.
So I don't know if this is true or not, but we were looking at AWS as kind of a backup infrastructure, and my understanding is that Amazon really frowns on monitoring tools in their environment. And I believe I read that Nagios is the solution that they recommend, and they provide something called a jump box. Do you know anything about that? Is that like is it a template, or is it a VM that you can spin up and get your monitoring going, or do you know anything about that?
Well, there's a couple things. There's a marketplace that is within the AWS community that, for instance, if I was just really excited about that web server build that I had, I could release that into the Amazon marketplace, and then the rest of you could search for it using keywords and whatever, and you could go find, Eric's favorite web server. You would have the AMI for that, which is the Amazon instance identifier, basically, and you could go spin up your own instance based on that snapshot, if you think of it that way. So I know that there is a Nagios snapshot, a Nagios AMI, that comes with Nagios installed. I don't know specifically about what you're referring to, but I'm guessing that it is something that has been created that has Nagios pre-installed on it that you can go and download. I'm a big fan of virtualization. I'm also a big fan of not trusting anybody. And if you build a machine, I might trust every one of you in here with my life, but I'm not going to trust you with my data. So building from core source and installing everything the way I want it installed, the way that we need it installed, as opposed to taking a VM image or a snapshot created by somebody else, that's not how we operate, so I don't know specifically about that. To address kind of your earlier question about Amazon saying, yeah, don't monitor, they make no restrictions except for legal ones about what you can do with their platform. So, don't know what I just did. Okay. So no pornography. Actually, I think you can do pornography, but it's got to be legal pornography. You can't do anything illegal, basically, with their platform is what their agreement is. But there's no restrictions about monitoring as far as I'm aware of, and especially within your own cloud network. The other thing, to back up to the beginning, talking about what Amazon does, you're not just sort of leasing a processor. You're also leasing the bandwidth or the network, and you're also leasing disk. If you keep the thresholds of those things below, or the usage of those things below certain thresholds, there's usually not any additional charges. If you're monitoring internally, and you're not really putting data in and out of Amazon, then that's free. There's no bandwidth charges for that. So if you're monitoring your own platform within Amazon, then you're not really affecting anybody else. You're on essentially your own VPN. They have monitoring that they want to sell you, which I'm sure is why they don't want you to run your own monitoring. But to my knowledge, there's no restrictions on what you can do with that. Others?
Do we have any other questions?
He's smiling.
I'm a little bit curious. Is there a specific reason why you chose to build Nagios from source instead of just doing yum install Nagios?
Yes. I don't trust anybody. That's it.
Except the source.
Except source, right. Yeah, you got to trust something. There is, and the reason is because it's a live demo and it's cool. And the repositories are great for installing things, but the idea is to actually build, let's build from source. So kind of a little bit of a joke, but building from source, as you saw, it almost took longer to download it than it did to actually build. Could I do it with Yum? Absolutely. I mean, these are CentOS-based machines, so there's no reason why I couldn't grab it from the repository. But it's almost as easy, if not even easier, if you're just copying and pasting, in my case, to install it from source.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you do the same thing with Ubuntu images? We use a mix of CentOS and Ubuntu.
Yeah, I don't know what I did to the
deployment.
projector. I don't know how I did something to the projector. Oh, there's a power strip. There we go. I don't know if it'll come back, but if it does, if we go back to our Amazon instance stuff here, maybe my crack tech team can help me out. There's a number of, AMI actually stands for Amazon Machine Image. And so you and I would call it a snapshot, or perhaps you could think of it as that's the ISO image of your virtual box. Is it going to come, do you think? All right. Well, I'll just talk about it. You don't have to see it. If you actually create an Amazon account and you go to launch an instance, the very first page, I'm looking at it right now, is, all right, I'll hold this up, but the very first page is when I clicked, I just clicked through these things quickly because I knew what I was doing and I wanted to get to the meat. But what I created was what's called an Amazon Linux image. And that's based on CentOS, but it's an Amazon-ified version of it. That's their free tier service that they can provide. The next one down is Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7. The next one down is SUSE Linux Enterprise Server 11 SP3. The next one down is Ubuntu Server 14.04. Next one down is Microsoft Windows. So they have a lot of things that you can start from. The other thing is some of these are, again, I'm not trying to get too far into what EC2 is all about. So there you go. So when I said I wanted this Amazon Linux AMI, it's telling me here, I don't know if you can actually read it. Maybe I can make it bigger. Not very much. But it says the Amazon Linux AMI is an EBS-backed image. And if I make this a little smaller, you'll see down here the SUSE Enterprise Server is an SSD-backed image. There are actually two types of media for disk that Amazon will let you use. They'll let you use their SSD drives, or they'll let you use, they just call it magnetic, So old school, actual spinning platters. You'll get charged more for the SSD if you need that kind of performance. But they give you the ability to have a 64-bit machine, generally speaking, a 64-bit machine or a 32-bit machine. And if we start looking through here, you'll see there are other things as we start scrolling down. I'm just going to go at random. So if you really wanted Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6.5 with an EBS-backed disk space, you could grab that in 32-bit or 64-bit. Don't know why you would need that specifically, but this is what their base image installs are. There's also this AWS Marketplace, which we can go and start searching for 1,000 different things that we can buy. And then there's these community images, which some of them are very specific to one person really wanting to have WordPress running in an Amazon web server, and they installed WordPress and they released this AMI out into the community. And if you want to run WordPress, you can download their AMI. That's where I get back to the whole, and if I want to run WordPress, I'm going to install it from scratch. So I guess we have maybe time for one more, or maybe not. I don't know.
No, we got to make sure everybody gets we're less than 10 minutes away from the next session,
All right.
so we got to make sure that.
So
Thank you guys for the questions. Nice round of applause for Eric Loyd.